Good evening, friends, and welcome to Sleepy Time Tales, a podcast aimed at helping you to get a good night's sleep. Do you find your mind plagued with the stresses of modern life, especially when the lights are out and you're trying to get a restful night? Does your spinning mind keep you awake? Follow my voice down the path towards a good night's rest. Listen to me tell a story that will keep your mind from wandering to your daytime problems, the ones you can't solve right now, and will be easier to solve well rested. Listen to my voice and allow yourself to drift, following the twists and turns of the story, but slowly letting go and drifting into sleep. So what exactly is Sleepy Time Tales? What is it for? What is this strange thing, this strange idea, this podcast that you're supposed to fall asleep to? Lack of sleep is a health crisis in the 21st century, and this is a podcast intended to help those that it can to get a restful night. Do you find yourself lying awake at night, mind spinning and emotions in turmoil with anxieties of 21st century life? Do you wake up in the middle of the night and find yourself not quite able to doze back off at 3 a.m.? I'm here to help. My name is Dave, and I'm your narrator, here to help you into a restful night. Sleepy Time Tales is intended to be used as a distraction to what keeps you awake at night, or maybe sometimes background noise or even just company. The main idea with the show is that it gives you something to focus on, a story or event that lets you keep your mind on a specific point, to stop it from spinning out into those stresses and anxieties, to help you to focus just enough not to resist the embrace of a night's sleep when it comes for you. But maybe you need something a bit different. Maybe you just need some kind of background noise, some kind of white noise, or the sound of the ocean, or wind in the trees, or maybe just some boring dude droning on in the background. As you listen, don't try to force the sleep. Just keep a light mental grip on the thread of the story and allow the need for sleep to come for you. Now, obviously, I'm hoping you're asleep before I get to the end of the episode, but don't feel pressurized. If this is your first night, it probably won't work for you. It'll probably take you a few nights to get used to listening to my voice. Maybe my accent is strange to you, maybe one episode just isn't long enough. Or maybe your problem isn't going to sleep. Maybe your problem is waking up in the middle of the night. What I recommend is that you let the podcast run all night. Download a whole bunch of episodes, put them in a playlist, enough to run through the whole night, and let them go. That way, if you find yourself awake and unable to fall back asleep again, you can just carry on listening and drift straight back to sleep again. Maybe you even wake up before your alarm, 30 minutes or 60 minutes. You can do the same thing then. Just carry on listening. Let sleep come for you once more. And you may wonder what the point is. What good is an extra 30 minutes of sleep? But there is something about allowing yourself complete relaxation right before the alarm that's satisfying on a deep level. It's very important, though, that you try to relax. If you're new to the show and prone to late nights lying staring at the ceiling, this may seem strange to you, so give it a chance. Because I'm here to work with you, to create a safe space, a cocoon in which you can curl up and allow nature to take its course. So if you're still with me, thank you for staying. If you're already asleep, we'll chat again soon. And of course you aren't hearing me, except maybe in a dream. Before we get on with the show, I'd like to ask for a couple of minutes of your time. First up, I'd love to thank Moya for signing up to the Patreon. Thanks, Moya, for your support. I'm very grateful and glad the podcast is helping you enough that you feel it's worth your support. And shout-outs too to the folks who have been contributing via the tip jar the last few weeks. Jackie and Mary have thrown a little something in the tip jar, and I appreciate that very much. I'm glad that I can help people to get a good night's sleep, and I'm very happy that they find it worthwhile enough to contribute to help me keep the show going. And a special thanks to Mary, a repeat supporter. So thanks again to all of you, Moya, Mary, and Jackie. Thanks so much. And if you're finding Sleepy Time Tales useful to help you to get a restful night, and you would like to help keep it going out to thousands of insomniacs just like you, and importantly, if you have the means to help me, please consider supporting on the Patreon at patreon.com/sleepytimetales. This is monthly support that you can contribute to for as little as $2 a month to help me keep the show going and going out to people just like you. But of course, monthly can be a big ask, and if that is, then there's the tip jar on the website, which I've also had a lot of help through recently as well. And I've mentioned recently that it has been a bit of a struggle for me to try keep the show going. It's difficult for me at the moment to dedicate the time that it and you listeners deserve. So I really need the podcast to justify itself financially. As I've said, I don't need to earn a living, but the current Patreon income and odd tip doesn't cover the hours I put in and barely covers most of the costs. The audience for Sleepy Time Tales is growing all the time, but the income has actually been going down. It's jumped up a bit in the last few months thanks to the supporters I've mentioned, but it is still lower than it was about a year ago. It's not in danger of shutting down in the next couple of weeks, but if it's not doing something to help cover its running by mid-year, I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to keep it up. To emphasize though, if you can't afford to make any contributions, please don't feel guilted into it, because times are tough for a lot of people. But if just a few more of the thousands of you that listen every week can kick in the price of a cup of coffee once a month, I can keep this going, and I'd even love to expand it. I always had big plans for Sleepy Time Tales, and I'd like to do more exciting things for supporters, so I'd love it if you could help me with that. Thanks for the time. Let's get back to the show. It's been a while, but we return this week to A History of Art for Beginners and Students, Painting, Sculpture, and Architecture by Clara Erskine Clement Waters. The art of Abels was full of grace and sweetness, and the finish of his pictures was exquisite. The saying, "leave off in time," originated in his criticism of Protogenes, of whom he said that he was his superior, except that he did not know when to leave off, and by too much finishing lessened the effect of his work. Apelles was modest and generous. He was the first to praise Protogenes, and conferred a great benefit upon the latter by buying up his pictures, and giving out word that he was going to sell them as his own. Apelles was never afraid to correct those who were ignorant, and was equally ready to learn from anyone who could teach him anything. It is said that on one occasion, when Alexander was in his studio and talked of art, Apelles advised him to be silent, lest his color grinder should laugh at him. Again, when he had painted a picture and exposed it to a public view, a cobbler pointed out a defect in the shoe latchet. Apelles changed it. But when the man next proceeded to criticize the leg of the figure, Apelles replied, "Cobbler, stick to your last." These sayings have descended to our own day and have become classical. All these anecdotes from so remote a time are in a sense doubtful, but they are very interesting. Young people ought to be familiar with them, but it is also right to say that they are not known to be positively true. Protogenes of Rhodes, to whom Apelles was so friendly, came to be thought a great painter. It is said that when Demetrius made war against Rhodes, the artist did not trouble himself to leave his house, which was in the very midst of the enemy's camp. When questioned as to his fearlessness, he replied, "Demetrius makes war against the Rhodians, and not against the arts." It is also said that after hearing of this reply, Demetrius refrained from burning the town, in order to preserve the pictures of Protogenes. Ancient writers mention many other Greek painters, but none as important as those of whom we have spoken. Greek painting never reached a higher point than it had gained at the beginning of the Hellenistic age. Every kind of painting except landscape painting had been practiced by Greek artists, but that received no attention until figure painting had declined. Vitruvius mentions that the ancients had some very important wall paintings consisting of simple landscapes, and that others had landscape backgrounds with figures illustrating scenes from the poems of Homer. But we have no reason to believe that Greek landscape painting was ever more than scenic or decorative work, and thus fell far short of what is now the standard for such painting. The painting of the early Romans was principally derived from, or through, the early Etruscans, and the Etruscans are believed to have first learned their art from Greek artists, who introduced plastic art into Italy as early as 655 BC, when Demaratus was expelled from Corinth. And later, Etruscan art was influenced by the Greek colonies of Magna Graecia. So it is fair to say that Etruscan art and early Roman art were essentially Greek art. The earliest artists who are known to have painted in Rome had Greek names, such as Ekphantos, Damophilos, and Gorgassos. Later on in history, there are painters mentioned with Latin names, but there is little of interest related concerning them. In truth, Ludius, who is also called by various authors Tadius and Studius, is the only really interesting ancient Roman painter of whom we know. He lived in the time of Augustus, and Pliny said of him, "Ludius too, who lived in the age of the divine Augustus, must not be cheated of his fame." He was the first to bring in a singularly delightful fashion of wall painting. Villaners, colonnades, examples of landscape gardening, woods and sacred groves, reservoirs, straits, rivers, coasts, all according to the heart's desire. And amidst them passengers of all kinds on foot, in boats, driving in carriages or riding on asses to visit their country properties. Furthermore, fishermen, bird catchers, hunters, vintagers, or again, exhibit stately villas, to which the approach is through a swamp, with men staggering under the weight of the frightened women who they have bargained to carry on their shoulders, and many other excellent and entertaining devices of the same kind. The same artist also set the fashion of painting views, and that wonderfully cheap, of seaside towns in broad daylight. We cannot think that Ludius was the first painter, though he may have been the first Roman painter who made this sort of pictures, and he probably is the only one whose work in any part remains. Brun and other good authorities believe that the wall painting of Prima Porta in Rome was executed by Ludius. It represents a garden and covers the four walls of a room. It is of the decorative order of painting, as Pliny well understood, for he speaks of the difference between the work of Ludius and that of the true artists who painted panel pictures and not wall paintings. After the time of Ludius, we can give no trustworthy account of any fine Roman painter. The works of the ancient painters, which still remain in various countries, are wall paintings, paintings on vases, mosaics, paintings on stone, and certain so-called miniatures. And besides these principal works, there are many small articles, such as mirrors, toilet cases, and other useful objects, which are decorated in colors. We will first speak of the mural or wall paintings, as they are the most important and interesting remains of ancient painting. we shall only consider such as have been found in Italy, or those of other countries are few and unimportant. The Etruscan tombs which have been opened contain many beautiful objects of various kinds, and were frequently decorated with mural pictures. They often consist of several rooms, and have the appearance of being prepared as a home for the living, rather than for the dead. I shall give you no long or wordy description of them, because if what I tell you leads you to wish to know more about them, there are many excellent books describing them which you can read. So I will simply give you 2 cuts from these Etruscan paintings and tell you about them. Figure 5 is in a tomb known as the Grotta della Quercola. The upper part represents a feast, and the lower portion a boar hunt in a wood, which is indicated by the few trees and the little twigs, which are intended to represent the underbrush of the forest. If we compare these pictures with the works of the best Italian masters, they seem very crude and almost childish in their simplicity. But if we contrast them with the paintings of the Egyptians and Assyrians, we see that a great advance has been made since the earliest paintings of which we know were done. The pose and action of the figures and their grace of movement, as well as the folding of the draperies, are far better than anything earlier than the Greek painting of which there is any knowledge. For as we have said, these Etruscan works are essentially Greek. Figure 6 belongs to a later period than the other, and is taken from a tomb at Voltaire, which was opened in 1857 by Francois. This tomb has 7 different chambers, several of which are decorated with wall paintings of mythological subjects. A square chamber at the end of the tomb has the most important pictures. On one side, the human sacrifices which were customary at Etruscan funerals are represented. The pictures are very painful, and the terror and agony of the poor victims who are being put to death make them really repulsive to see. On an opposite wall is the painting from which our cut is taken. This represents the sacrifices made before Troy by Achilles, on the account of the death of his dear friend Patroclus. The figure with the hammer is Charon, who stands ready to receive the sacrifice which is intended to win his favor. Your mythology will tell you the story, which is too long to be given here. The realism of this picture is shocking in its effect, and yet there is something about the manner of drawing and the arrangement of the whole design that fixes our attention, even while it makes us shudder. The ancient wall paintings which have been found in Rome are far more varied than those of Etruria. For while some of the Roman pictures are found in tombs, others are taken from baths, palaces, and villas. They generally belong to one period, and that is about the close of the Republic and the beginning of the Empire. Modern excavations have revealed many of these ancient paintings, but so many of them crumble and fade away so soon after they are exposed to the air that few remain in a condition to afford any satisfaction in seeing them. But fortunately drawings have been made of nearly all these pictures before they fell into decay. Some of the ancient paintings have been carefully removed from the walls where they were found, and placed in museums and other collections. One of the finest of these is in the Vatican and is called the Aldobrandini marriage. It received its name from the fact that Cardinal Aldobrandini was the first possessor after its discovery near the Arch of Galenius in 1606. As you will see from Figure 7, from it there are 3 distinct groups represented. In the center, the bride veiled, with her head modestly bowed, is seated on a couch with a woman beside her who seems to be arranging some part of her toilet, while another stands near holding an ointment in a bowl. At the head of the couch, the bridegroom is seated on a threshold. The upper part of his figure is bare, and he has a garland upon his head. On the right of the picture, an anteroom is represented in which there are 3 women with musical instruments, singing sacrificial songs. To the left, in another apartment, 3 other women are preparing a bath. This is charming on account of the sweet, serious way in which the whole story is placed before us. But as a painting, it is an inferior work of art, not in the least above the style which we should call house decoration. Although ancient writers had spoken of landscape paintings, it was not until 1848 to 1850, when a series of them was discovered on the Esquiline in Rome, that any very satisfactory specimens could be shown. These pictures number 8. 6 are complete. Of the 7th but half remains, and the 8th is in a very imperfect state. They may be called historical landscapes, because each one has a complete landscape, as well as figures which tell a story. They illustrate certain passages from the Odyssey of Homer. The one from which our cut is taken shows the visit of Ulysses to the lower world. When on the wall, the pictures were divided by pilasters and finished at the top by a border or frieze. The pilasters are bright red, and the chief colors in the picture are a yellowish brown and a greenish blue. In this scene, the way in which the light streams through the entrance to the lower world is very striking, and shows the many figures there with the best possible effect. Even those in the far distance on the right are distinctly seen. This collection of Esquiline wall paintings is now in the Vatican Library. Besides the ancient mural paintings which have been placed in the museums of Rome, there are others which still remain where they were painted, in palaces, villas, and tombs. Perhaps those in the house of Livia are the most interesting. They represent mythological stories, and one frieze has different scenes of street life in an ancient town. Though these decorations are done in a mechanical sort of painting, such as is practiced by the ordinary fresco painters of our own time, yet there was sufficient artistic feeling in their authors to prevent their repeating any one design. One circumstance proves that this class of picture was not thought very important when it was made, which is that the name of the artist is rarely found upon his work. In but one instance, either in Rome or Pompeii, has this occurred, namely in a chamber which was excavated in the gardens of the Phoenicia Palace at Rome, and the name is Seleucus. We have not space to speak of all the Italian cities in which these remains are discovered, and as Pompeii is the one most frequently visited, and that in which a very large proportion of the ancient pictures have been found, I will give a few illustrations from them, and leave the subject of ancient mural paintings there. Many of the Pompeian pictures have been removed to the Museum of Naples, though many still remain where they were first painted. The variety of subjects of Pompeii is large. There are landscapes, hunting scenes, mythological subjects, numerous kinds of single figures such as dancing girls, the hours or seasons, graces, satyrs, and many others, devotional pictures such as representations of the ancient divinities, Lares, Penates, Genii, pictures of tavern scenes, of mechanics at their work, rope dances and representations of various games, gladiatorial contests, genre scenes from the lives of children, youths, and women, festival ceremonies, actors, poets, and stage scenes, and last but not least, many caricatures, of which I here give you an example. Figure 9. In this figure, the large dog is Aeneas, who leads the little Ascanius by the hand and carries his father, Anchises, on his shoulder. Frequently in the ancient caricatures, monkeys are made to take the part of historical and imaginary heroes. Figure 11 shows you how these painted walls were sometimes divided. The principal subjects were surrounded by ornamental borders, and the spaces between filled in with all sorts of little compartments. The small spaces in this picture are quite regular in form, but frequently they are of varied shapes, and give a very decorative effect to the whole work. The colors used upon these different panels, as they may be called, were usually red, yellow, black, and white, more rarely blue and green. Sometimes the entire decoration consisted of these small, variously colored spaces, divided by some graceful little border, with a very small figure, plant, or other object in the center of each space. Figure 10 of Demeter or Ceres enthroned is an example of such devotional paintings, as were placed above the altars and shrines for private worship in the houses of Pompeii, or at the street corners, just as we now see pictures and sacred figures in the street shrines in Roman Catholic countries. In ancient days, as now, these pictures were often done in a coarse and careless manner, as of religious use and not art, was the object in the mind of the artist. Figure 12 of a nest of cupids is a very interesting example of Pompeian painting, and to my mind it more nearly represents pictures of later times than it does any other ancient paintings of which I know. Mosaics. The pictures known as mosaics are made by fitting together bits of marble, stone, or glass of various colors, and so arranging them as to represent figures and objects of various kinds, so that at a distance they have much the same effect as that of pictures painted with brush and colors. The art of making mosaics is very ancient. It was probably invented in the East, where it was used for borders and other decorations in regular set patterns. It was not until after the time of Alexander the Great that the Greeks used this process for making pictures. At first, too, mosaics were used for floors or pavements only, and the designs in them were somewhat like those of the tile pavements of our own time. This picture of doves will give you a good idea of the mosaic. The subject is a very interesting one because it is said to have been first made by Sosos in Pergamos. It was often repeated in later days, and that from which our cut is taken was found in the ruins of Hadrian's villa at Tivoli near Rome. It is known as Capitoline doves, from the fact that it is now in the Capitoline Museum in Rome. Few works of ancient art are more admired and is frequently copied as this mosaic. It is not unusual to see ladies wear brooches with this design in fine mosaic work. A few examples of ancient mosaics which were used for wall decorations have been found. They may also be said not to exceed a dozen, but pavement mosaics are very numerous, and are still seen in the places for which they were designed, and where they have been during many centuries, as well as in museums to which they have been removed. They are so hard in outline and so mechanical in every way that they are not very attractive if we think of them as pictures. and their chief interest is in the skill and patience with which mosaic workers combine the numberless particles of one substance and another, which go to make up the whole. Mosaic pictures, as a rule, are not large, but one found at Palestrina, which is called the Nile mosaic, is 6 by 5 meters inside. Its subject is the inundation of a village on the River Nile. There are an immense number of figures and a variety of scenes in it. There are Egyptians hunting the Nile horse, a party of revelers in a bower draped with vines, bands of warriors and other groups of men occupied in different pursuits, and are all represented at the season when the Nile overflows its banks. This is a very remarkable work, and it has been proved that a portion of the original is in the Berlin Museum, and has been replaced by a copy at Palestrina. Paintings on stone. It is well known that much of the decoration of Greek edifices was in colors. Of course, these paintings were put upon the marble and stone of which the structures are made. The Greeks also made small pictures and painted them on stone, just as canvas and panels of wood are now used. Such painted slabs have been found in Herculaneum, in Corneto, and in different Etruscan tombs. But the most important and satisfactory one was found at Pompeii in 1872. Since then, the colors have almost vanished. But figure 14, from it, will show you how it appeared when found. It represents the mythological story of the punishment of Niobe and is very beautiful in its design. Phase painting. Phase painting was another art very much practiced by the ancients. So much can be said of it that it would require more space than we can give for its history, even in outline. So I shall only say that it fills an important place in historic art, because from the thousands of ancient phases that have been found in one country and another, much has been learned concerning the history of these lands, and the manners and customs of their people. Occasionally inscriptions are found upon decorated vases, which are of great value to scholars who study the history of the past. The Dodwell vase shows you the more simple style of decoration, which was used in the earlier times. Gradually, the designs came to be more and more elaborate, until whole stories were as distinctly told by the pictures on vases, as if they had been written out in books. The next cut, which is made from a vase painting, will show what I mean. The subject of figure 16 is connected with the service of the dead, and shows a scene in the upper world, such as accorded with ancient religious notions. In the upper portion, the friends of the deceased are grouped around a little temple. Scholars trace the manufacture of these vases back to very ancient days, and down to its decline, about 2 centuries before Christ. I do not mean that vase painting ceased then, for its latest traces came down to 65 BC. But like all other ancient arts, it was then in a state of decadence. The vase painting was one of the lesser arts, as important can be scarcely overestimated, and it fully merits the devoted study and admiration which it receives from those who are learned in its history. From what we know of ancient Greek painting, we may believe that this art first reached perfection in Greece. If we could see the best works of Apelles, who reached the highest excellence of any Greek painter, we might find some lack of the truest science of the art when judged by more modern standards. But the Greeks must still be credited with having been the first to create a true art of painting. After the decline of Greek art, 15 centuries elapsed before painting was again raised to the rank which the Greeks had given it. And if according to our ideas the later Italian painting is in any sense superior to the Greek, we must at least admit that the study of the works of antiquity which still remained in Italy excited the great masters of the Renaissance to the splendid achievements which they attained. Chapter 2. Medieval Painting from the beginning of the Christian era to the Renaissance. The Middle Ages extended from the latter part of the 5th century to the time of the Renaissance, or about the 15th century. The painting of this period has little to attract attention if regarded only from an artistic standpoint. For we may truly say that, comparing it with the Greek art which had preceded it, or with the Italian art which followed it, that of the Middle Ages had no claim to the beautiful. On the other hand, it is full of interest to students, because it has its part in the history of art. Therefore, I shall give a mere outline of it, so that this link in the chain which unites ancient and modern painting may not be entirely wanting in our book. Early medieval painting, down to about AD 950, consists principally of paintings in burial places, mosaics, usually in churches, and of miniatures, or the illustration and illumination of manuscripts, which are the books of that time, and were almost without exception religious writings. This period is called the early period of the Middle Ages, and the pictures are often called the works of early Christian art. About 1050, a revival of intellectual pursuits began in some parts of Europe, and from that time it may be said that the Renaissance, or new birth of arts and letters, was in its ABCs, or very smallest for beginnings. The period between 950 and 1250 is often called the Central or Romanesque period of the Middle Ages, and it was during this time that glass painting originated. It is one of the most interesting features of art in medieval times. From 1250 to 1400 comes the final or Gothic period of the Middle Ages, and this has some very interesting features which foretell the coming glory of the Great Renaissance. The early period. The paintings of the catacombs date from the 3rd and 4th centuries after Christ. The catacombs or burial places of the early Christians consist of long, narrow subterranean passages, cut with regularity, and crossing each other like streets in a city. The graves are in the sides of these passages, and there are some larger rooms or chambers into which the narrow passages run. There are about 60 of the catacombs in and near Rome. They are generally called by the name of some saint who is buried in them. The paintings are in the chambers, of which there are sometimes several quite near each other. The reason for their being in these underground places was that Christians were so persecuted under the Romans that they were obliged to do secretly all that they did as Christians, so that no attention could be attracted to them. The principal characteristics of these pictures are a simple majesty and earnestness of effect. Perhaps spirituality is the word to use, for by these paintings the early Christians desired to express their belief in the religion of Christ, and especially in the immortality of the soul, which was a very precious doctrine to them. The catacombs of Rome were more numerous and important than those of any other city. Many of the paintings in the catacombs had symbolic meaning, beyond the plainer intention which appeared at the very first sight of them. You'll know what I mean when I say that not only was this picture of Moses striking the rock intended to represent a historical fact in the life of Moses, but the flowing water was also regarded as a type of the blessing of Christian baptism. The walls of the chambers of the catacombs are laid out in such a manner as to have the effect of decorated apartments, such as was done in the pagan tombs, and sometimes the pictures were a strange union of pagan and Christian devices. The above cut from the Catacomb of St. Domitilla has in the center the pagan god Orpheus playing his lyre, while in the alternate compartments of the border are the following Christian subjects. 1. David with the sling. 2. Moses striking the rock. 3. Daniel in the lion's den. 4. The raising of Lazarus. The other small divisions have pictures of sacrificial animals. These two cuts will give you an idea of the catacomb wall paintings. And I think I'm going to leave it there. If you'd like to pick up where we've left off, or to look at the pictures that I refer to in the readings, and I think it's worthwhile because some of them are quite amazing, you can get the original book on Project Gutenberg at the link in the show notes. Thanks again for joining me on this episode of Sleepy Time Tales, the podcast designed around a bedtime story to help you to get a restful night. New episodes will be released every Sunday night to give you something fresh to help you rest in a new week. But make sure to follow or subscribe in whatever service you use so that you can get your new episodes whenever they come out. Good night and sweet dreams.